The air in the kitchen felt thick, dense with a cutting silence that had settled in. Aina's hands trembled slightly as she held the coffee cup. Finds a primal echo in the animal kingdom, in the rooster's territorial instinct. Just as Aina finds herself paralyzed by an internal force that compels her to protect her emotional territory, the rooster, with its imposing comb and defiant crow, patrols its domain with relentless vigilance. Any intruder, be it a rival or a perceived threat, is met with an aggression that borders on ferocity. It ruffles its feathers, emits warning calls, and, if necessary, attacks, driven by a biological program that ensures the survival of its lineage. Human fragility in the face of uncontrollable jealousy is, in a way, a distorting reflection of this instinctive defense of territory, where the mind becomes the battlefield and the heart, the prize to be protected at all costs. Which leads us to ask, are we truly the only ones to fight for what we consider ours? Or is there a deeper ancestry that shapes our way of loving and possessing? But it wasn't the heat of the drink that made her sweat. Every message on Pedro's phone, every relaxed laugh he shared with colleagues, was a sharp sting in her chest, an invisible prick that inflamed her soul. Her mind created scenarios, voices, touches that didn't exist, transforming innocence into betrayal. The green-eyed monster with flashing eyes that she tried to chain within her threatened to break free at any moment, a possessive guardian snarling at every shadow that approached what she considered hers. This visceral sensation, the blind possessiveness that distorts reality. Night slowly fell over Aina and Pedro's small apartment, painting the walls with orange hues before plunging them into twilight. The smell of fresh basil, wafting from the simmering sauce Aina was preparing for dinner, should have filled the air with warmth, but for her, a palpable tension hung, like a cold mist that made breathing difficult. Pedro was sitting on the couch, the bluish light of the tablet casting dancing shadows on his face as he chuckled softly at something he was watching. An innocuous sound, ordinary, the familiar melody of evening leisure. But for Aina, it was a trigger. His laughter echoed in her mind, transforming into an insidious whisper that he might be laughing with someone else, because of someone else, for someone else. Every fiber of her being contracted in high alert. She watched him askance, her heart pounding erratically, a frantic drum in her chest. A sharp pang of pain, like a cold needle, pierced her chest when he quickly typed a reply on the messaging app. Her fingers tingled with the almost physical urgency to grab the device, to scour every word, every emoji, every period, in search of undeniable proof of a betrayal that existed only in her head, but materialized in visceral sensations. Dinner, the pots on the stove, the aroma of the sauce, everything disappeared, overshadowed by the only thing that mattered, the glowing screen in his hands. The secret she felt was hidden there, suffocating her in her own anxiety. This impulse to dominate, to control territory and everything within it, is an intrinsic and primal characteristic of the rooster. In its worldview, the chicken coop is not just a physical space. It is its unquestionable kingdom, and the hens, its subjects, an integral part of its property. It doesn't hesitate to expel rivals, nor to intimidate any creature that dares to challenge the order it has established. Its posture is that of an irrefutable king, with an upright calm, a proud neck, spurs as sharp as knives, and a strident crow that echoes in the morning, not just as a greeting to the sun, but as a declaration of sovereignty, a warning to anyone who thinks of questioning it. The way it pecks the ground in search of food and offers it to the nearest hens is not just an act of generosity or courtship, but a subtle yet powerful demonstration of its power, its ability to provide, and by extension, its control over resources. Its aggression, often seen as crude, is in fact a highly efficient way to ensure its genetic material is passed on, that its offspring prosper, protecting the females and the resources necessary for the survival of its clan and the perpetuation of its species. The connection between Anna's experience and the rooster's behavior lies deep within the neurobiology of possession and territoriality. In both humans and animals, complex reward and threat circuits in the brain are activated when something we consider ours, be it a partner, offers us a window into our own nature, into the abysses of our psyche. We are not merely rational beings. We are also the result of millions of years of evolution, with innate behaviors that, though once essential for the survival of our ancestors in a wilder world, can become traps and emotional prisons in a complex, interconnected world like ours. The rooster fights for its territory to procreate and survive, driven by a biological program. We often fight for an illusory control, for a security that never materializes, and end up creating conflicts that distance us from those we love and, more painfully, from ourselves. The journey to accept and integrate these shadows, to recognize the presence of primitive instincts in our modern lives, is the first step toward finding true freedom beyond the confines of our own mental chicken coop. The real question is, can we transcend our darker instincts when they threaten to destroy us? Or are we doomed to peck the ground in search of a control we will never have, trapped in a cycle of distrust and pain? A resource, or even social status, is at stake. In humans, the release of oxytocin, often called the love hormone for its role in strengthening emotional bonds and trust, can, paradoxically, in excess or in contexts of insecurity and fear of loss, trigger possessive and jealous behaviors. This dual nature of oxytocin reveals the complexity of our emotions. The rooster, in turn, possesses a highly developed limbic system, the part of the brain associated with emotions and instincts, which compels it to react fiercely to intruders, protecting its access to females and food resources. Dopamine, a neurotransmitter associated with pleasure, motivation, and reward, reinforces its dominant behavior, creating a cycle of gratification each time it asserts its control. In both cases, there is an ancestral program to protect what ensures the continuity of the species, be it the exclusivity of a partner for human reproduction or the ability to procreate and transmit genes in the animal kingdom. Jealousy, therefore, can be seen as a distortion of this self-preservation instinct, where the rational mind is overwhelmed by primal impulses that, once essential for survival in a hostile environment, now manifest as internal emotional conflicts. The dinner was finally on the table. The aroma of basil and fresh tomatoes struggled to overcome the scent of tension that hung in the air. Anna could barely touch her food, her appetite suffocated by anxiety. Her eyes, previously focused on Pedro's screen, now followed him with an almost sickening intensity, scanning every movement, every expression. He, sensing the heavy atmosphere, tried to make conversation, but his words seemed to dissipate in the thick air between them, finding no echo or response. It was then that his phone vibrated again. Pedro picked it up, and a genuine smile, but to Anna, almost imperceptible and therefore even more unbearable, appeared on his lips as he read the message. At that moment, something inside her broke. A blind fury rose to her throat, a burning heat in her veins, and instinct, stronger than any vestige of reason, took over. She needed to know. She needed control. She needed to unravel the mystery. The choice between trust and the abyss of distrust seemed non-existent, swallowed by the compulsive need for possession. Understanding instincts, whether the rooster's territoriality in its coop or the jealousy that plagues and distorts us. The silence in the living room was deafening, dense, punctuated only by the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock, which seemed to mock the passage of time. Anna sat on an old armchair, its worn upholstery beneath her tense hands, her eyes fixed on the bedroom door, from which muffled sounds of Pedro's phone conversation emanated. A work call, he had said, his voice too casual to be convincing in her distorted perception. But every indistinct, incomprehensible word of his was a relentless hammer in her head, constructing vivid scenarios of imaginary infidelity, of secrets whispered on crossed lines. Her hands were cold and sweaty, her entire body tense. Every fiber of her being alerting her to an imminent danger that didn't exist in the real world. She wanted to get up, storm into the room, demand explanations, tear down the curtain of doubt, but an invisible force held her captive, paralyzed by the dread of her fears being confirmed. It was a painful vigil, where the threat came not from outside, from a tangible enemy, but from within, fueled by her own deepest fears and insecurities, like an emotional parasite. The air felt thin, making it difficult to breathe, as the sound of Pedro's voice transformed into a menacing noise, an omen of abandonment and loneliness. This state of constant alertness, incessant vigilance, and the visceral need to protect what is theirs are striking and essential characteristics for the survival of the rooster. It is the unwavering sentinel of the chicken coop, the first to spot an approaching predator, be it a hawk in the sky or a fox creeping through the grass. Its alarm call is shrill, echoing throughout the territory, a warning that puts the entire flock on alert. Its eyes, which seem to see in 360 degrees, and its innate ability to observe the environment around it from every angle, make it an efficient and tireless guardian. It doesn't mind fighting larger birds, stronger mammals, or even humans, if it feels its family, the hens, the chicks, and even the resources of the coop, are in imminent danger. Its vigilance is not just a reaction to an already present threat, but a proactive stance, a constant state of readiness that ensures the safety of its flock and the continuity of its lineage. Every step it takes, every peck at the ground in search of food, is accompanied by a furtive glance at the sky or the fence, in search of any sign of danger, any anomaly in its field of vision. Aina's vigilance and the rooster's, though in drastically different contexts, share deep neurological roots in the brain's defense system. In both cases, the amygdala, an almond-shaped brain structure responsible for processing fear to a large extent, a journey of self-knowledge and recognition of our own fragilities. The rooster's instinct for protection reminds us that vigilance is a vital component for the survival of any species, a crucial brain function for preservation. However, when this vigilance becomes excessive, unfounded, and obsessive, it transforms into an emotional prison, trapping not only the one who feels the pain of jealousy, but also the object of their affection, suffocating love and trust. Learning to distinguish between genuine protection, legitimate concern for well-being, and destructive possessiveness is the great challenge of adult life. Should we allow reason to calm the false alarms of our hyperactive amygdala, which screams, danger, where there is none? Or will we forever be anxious sentinels of an imaginary chicken coop, fighting against ghosts? True security, true peace, lies not in controlling the other, in possessing another's body or mind, but in self-confidence, inner strength, and the ability to love without the suffocating chains of fear and distrust. Anxiety and primary emotions is hyperactivated. In humans, post-traumas, experiences of abandonment, deep insecurities, or anxious attachment patterns can lead to a constant interpretation of ambiguous signals as direct threats. Any slip, any misinterpreted word, can be a trigger for a flood of fear. In roosters, this response is essential and vital for survival in a wild environment, where predators are a constant and vigilance is the difference between life and death. The release of cortisol and adrenaline, the stress hormones, prepares the body for fight or flight, increasing heart rate, muscle tension, and sensory acuity. This evolutionary heritage shows us how our most basic instincts, designed for physical survival in a distant past, can manifest in complex and often destructive ways in the emotional and psychological realm, transforming protection into possessiveness and necessary vigilance into constant torment. Suddenly, the bedroom door opened with a slight creak. Pedro emerged, phone still in hand, but with a slight, genuine smile on his lips. All sorted. It was just a simple work matter with the office staff, he said, approaching Aina, trying to break the ice. The momentary relief, which lasted only a second, was quickly replaced by a new and overwhelming wave of distrust. His words seemed insufficient to calm the storm. "Who exactly were you talking to?" she asked, her voice almost inaudible, but with an almost brutal intensity that startled herself. It was an uncontrollable need to check every detail, to confirm every word, to ensure there were no loopholes, cracks, or secret doors in her emotional territory. The instinct of protection, distorted and amplified by pathological jealousy, forced her to act, to question, even knowing, in a distant corner of her consciousness, that her obsessive questions would only push Pedro further away, into the distance she so greatly feared. The journey to understand and master jealousy is a Sunday family lunch, a setting that should have been filled with joy, laughter, and lightness, transformed into a minefield of tension for Aina. Pedro's cousin recently returned from an exchange program in Europe. In both cases, the response is triggered by the perception, real or imaginary, of a threat to reproductive resources or social position. In roosters, testosterone plays a crucial role in regulating aggression and dominance, driving them to fight for their space. Was animatedly recounting stories of her travels, the exotic cultures she had experienced, the breathtaking landscapes. Pedro, naturally, showed interest and smiled openly, asking questions and laughing at her anecdotes. Every shared laugh, every exchanged glance, no matter how innocent or familial, was interpreted by Aina as blatant flirting, a direct and calculated threat to her place, to her dominance over Pedro. Her muscles were tense, like the strings of a bow about to fire, her hands clenched into invisible fists under the table. A cold, contained rage began to bubble in her stomach, rising through her throat like acidic reflux as the searing sensation of being excluded and diminished invaded her, swallowed her whole. She wanted to scream, to point an accusing finger, to expose the betrayal she saw so clearly, even knowing in a distant corner of her mind that it was irrational, that her interpretation was a distortion. The urge to attack, to mark her territory undeniably, to show who really ruled there, was almost unbearable, an impulse that consumed her from within. The rooster's aggression in defense of its territory is legendary and visceral. It does not hesitate to fight, with strong, precise pecks and spurs as sharp as blades, against any male who dares to challenge its dominance or invade its vital space. This aggression, though it may seem brutal to human eyes, is not gratuitous. It is an instinctive and vital response to ensure its access to females, food resources, and a safe, protected place for its offspring. The intensity of its attack is directly proportional to the perceived threat. The greater the risk to its reign, the fiercer its reaction. The rooster defends its social position, its unwavering status in the flock, with a ferocity that impresses and often subjugates, ensuring that its genetic legacy prevails and its lineage continues. It is the relentless guardian of its domain, the king of its yard, and any intruder is treated as an enemy to be repelled or, if necessary, subdued without mercy. The aggression and situations of human jealousy and the rooster as territoriality are phenomena that can be analyzed through the lens of evolutionary psychology and comparative neurobiology. In humans, although testosterone is also involved, the complexity of cognition, emotions, and social interactions adds layers of nuance. Pathological jealousy, for example, can activate brain areas linked to social pain, anger, and frustration, leading to aggressive behaviors such as cruel verbal attacks, excessive control over a partner, or even physical violence. This evolutionary heritage shows us that, although we have developed the capacity for reason and morality, we still carry primitive structures in our brains that compel us to defend what we consider ours, often disproportionately to the actual threat. transforming possession into poison. The lunch, laden with a heavy atmosphere, came to an end. But Aina's rage simmered beneath the surface, a volcano about to erupt. She couldn't contain a sarcastic and passive-aggressive remark directed at Pedro's cousin, masked by a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, it's good you're back. Pedro was so worried you wouldn't adapt out there. Weren't you, Pedro?" she said, with an intonation that transformed concern into veiled accusation. The venom in her voice was palpable, and the atmosphere around them instantly became denser, tenser, as if the air had been sucked out. The need to mark her space, to assert her undeniable possession over Pedro, was stronger than any desire to maintain peace or family harmony. She was in attack mode, driven by the blind fury of her jealousy, like a rooster defending its yard with its life, without caring about the devastating consequences of its emotional pecks. Understanding the rooster's territorial aggression helps us see the deeper roots of our own destructive impulses. The defense of territory, whether physical, the ground we walk on, or emotional, the space we occupy in someone's heart, is a primary instinct, inherent to our biology. However, the human capacity for reflection, for self-awareness, and for making choices offers us the unique opportunity to transcend simple aggression. We can channel this protective energy that drives us into building healthy relationships based on trust, mutual respect, and freedom, instead of becoming prisoners of a vicious cycle of jealousy and conflict that consumes us. True strength does not lie in dominating others, in submitting them to our will, but in mastering oneself, in understanding that insecurity is the real enemy to be fought, not the partner. Are we capable of learning from the rooster to defend what is essential for our lives, without losing ourselves in the aggression that is merely a projection of our fears and insecurities? The apartment lights were out, and Aina lay curled up in bed, though in a different way and with more biological purposes. In both, the need for social connection, to belong to a group, to have a partner, is fundamental for mental and physical health. In humans, the formation of secure attachment bonds is crucial for emotional development, stress regulation, and ultimately, psychological survival. The breaking of these bonds or the perceived threat of loss activates the attachment system, releasing hormones like cortisol, which cause intense stress and debilitating anxiety. In social animals like the rooster, the disruption of the social structure, the loss of the flock, can lead to significant hormonal and behavioral dysregulations. Comparative ethology shows us that the formation of groups and hierarchies is an evolutionary strategy for protection against predators, access to resources, and ensuring the reproduction of the species. Thus, human jealousy, at its deepest root, can be interpreted as an ancestral defense mechanism against the loss of a valuable resource, the partner, love, connection, which, in an ancestral context, meant the loss of support, security, and chances of survival. Despite its ferocity in defending its territory, the rooster is, paradoxically, a social animal, benefiting from and depending on the cohesive structure of the flock. It needs its hens not only for reproduction, but to establish and maintain its social hierarchy. And although it fights rivals, the presence of other males, even if of lower status, contributes to the group's dynamic and to the perception of security. A rooster isolated from its flock, stripped of its social role, may show clear signs of stress, such as excessive and desperate vocalizations, depression, or, paradoxically, disproportionate aggression when confronted, resulting from frustration and anxiety. Loneliness for the rooster represents vulnerability in terms of safety from predators and opportunities for reproduction. Its life, its purpose, revolves around its role within the chicken coop, and the absence of this social context directly impacts its well-being, its health, and its ability to survive and thrive. Facing the wall, feigning a stillness she didn't feel, a false serenity to mask the internal storm. Beside her, Pedro breathed softly, in a peaceful sleep she envied. The pain in her chest was almost physical, a tight knot of anxiety and emptiness that seemed to consume her breath. He had gone out for a happy hour with colleagues, and every minute he delayed returning was torment, an eternity of uncertainty. Her mind swirled with vivid images of laughter she didn't share, of complicit glances that excluded her, of conversations she couldn't hear. The feeling of being left behind, of being replaced, of becoming irrelevant, was overwhelming, a wave that swallowed her whole. It was an old, primitive fear, an atavistic dread that haunted her since childhood, the visceral terror of being abandoned, of being left alone in the world. She felt small, vulnerable, exposed, and the only way, however illusory, to mitigate the pain was to keep Pedro under her control, even if it suffocated her in her own possessiveness and pushed him away. Loneliness seemed like a shadow lurking in the corner of the room, ready to devour her whole if he distanced himself, if he dared to have a life outside her orbit. Social dependence and an aversion to loneliness are also observed in the rooster. The connection between the fear of loss in humans and the rooster, as social dependence lies deep within the neurobiology of attachment. When Pedro finally returned, the sound of the key turning in the lock reverberated in the apartment's silence. Aina couldn't hold back. The rooster's social dependence shows us how vital connection with others is, an intrinsic driving force of life. However, how we manage this need determines whether it will be a source of strength and joy or vulnerability and suffering. Uncontrollable jealousy traps us in a vicious cycle of fear and control, pushing away precisely what we most desire to keep: love, connection, intimacy. True security lies not in possessing the other, in restricting their freedom, but in nurturing one's own worth, in building solid self-esteem, and in building relationships based on freedom, mutual trust, and genuine respect. Are we willing to face the terrifying void of the fear of loss to achieve the fullness of a free love, unchained, without restraints, or will we continue to desperately cling to what we fear losing, condemned to an existence of insecurity and pain? She got out of bed, her body trembling, her voice almost inaudible with emotion but firm in its resolve, and confronted him at the door, words tumbling out, an uncontrollable flow of pain and accusation. Where were you? Why did you take so long? Who were you laughing with? The questions poured out, laden with desperation and fear, with an urgent need to fill the void. She needed reassurances, external validation that would calm the furious storm within her. The choice between trusting and succumbing to panic seemed impossible, a battle lost before it even began. The loneliness she so feared, paradoxically, materialized in the distance her own obsessive attitudes were creating between them, pushing Pedro into emotional isolation. Learning to deal with the fear of loss is one of the biggest and most challenging processes of the human experience. The argument erupted without warning, like thunder in a clear sky, tearing through the false tranquility of the night. Such as pathological jealousy in Aina and the instinctive fury of the rooster, though on different scales, share a common neurobiological basis linked to emotion regulation. In moments of dysregulation, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for logical reasoning, planning, and impulse control, can be overridden by the amygdala and other structures of the limbic system, which react more primitively and reactively. In humans, the accumulation of frustration, deep insecurity, and the distorted perception of threats, often imaginary, can lead to an emotional overload, a pressure cooker that explodes, resulting in outbursts of anger, verbal aggression, and destructive behaviors. In roosters, the trigger is more direct and tangible: territorial invasion, physical threat. Comparative ethology shows us that, although the contexts are culturally different, the way the brain deals with threat and generates fight or flight responses has deep and common ancestral roots, inherent to our evolution. Our ancestors' ability to react quickly to danger was crucial for the survival of the species. But in a modern and complex world, This same programming can lead to devastating and destructive emotional conflicts against ourselves and against those we love. A simple comment from Pedro about a colleague at work, a casual compliment about her efficiency on a project, was the fuse that lit the bomb in Aina. Her eyes widened, her pupils dilated with rage, the veins in her forehead pulsed visibly, and her voice, previously only tense and low, was now charged with an uncontrolled, shrill fury that echoed off the apartment walls. Words spilled from her mouth like sharp knives, each one forged by accumulated anger and the searing pain of insecurity. She couldn't stop, even knowing, in a flash of consciousness, that she was deeply hurting Pedro, that she was destroying what little remained between them. It was as if an external force, an inner demon, had taken over her body and mind, driving her to destroy, to wound, to retaliate. Control seemed to have completely vanished, and she found herself at the mercy of a primal, uncontrollable instinct that forced her to attack to relieve the unbearable pressure in her chest, a knot of anguish that seemed to suffocate her. The environment shrank around them, becoming claustrophobic, suffocating, as reason ebbed away amidst the emotional storm she herself had unleashed. When the rooster's territory is threatened, or its unquestionable dominance is challenged, it can enter a state of instinctive fury, an explosion of energy and aggression that is impressive to observe. Its attacks are swift, precise, and filled with overwhelming energy, a deadly dance of feathers and beaks. It doesn't think, it doesn't deliberate, it simply reacts, driven by a limbic system that compels it to defend its position at all costs, regardless of the consequences. The pecks, the acrobatic leaps, and the precise blows with its spurs are automatic reflexes of an animal programmed to survive and protect its genetic legacy. This burst of aggression is a physiological response to extreme stress, to a threat to its existence, where the massive discharge of adrenaline and testosterone prepares the body for combat, for fight or flight. And rational thought is completely suppressed in favor of immediate, instinctive action. The fury of instinct in the rooster is a tool for survival, a desperate last resort to assert its supremacy and ensure the continuity of its species. The manifestation of emotional dysregulation in humans. The argument reached its climax, a point of no return. Aina, feeling exhausted, drained, and deeply ashamed of her own behavior, finally retreated. However, our human capacity for introspection, for self-awareness, allows us to go beyond simple animal reaction. Emotional dysregulation, the outburst of jealousy, is a clear sign that something needs to be deeply worked on within ourselves, that there are unhealed wounds. Instead of letting ourselves be carried away by the overwhelming waves of jealousy and anger, we can learn to identify the triggers, to take a deep breath, to pause, and to choose a more constructive and empathetic response. Recognizing the fury of instinct within ourselves is the crucial first step to taming it, transforming it from a destructive force into an impulse for personal growth, for self-development. But the question that remains, echoing in the air, is, are we willing to face the painful truth of our own anger, of our own insecurity, or do we prefer to surrender to uncontrollable fury? Like the rooster in its yard, never understanding the true cost of our attacks and their devastating consequences. Like a wave receding from the sand, the silence that followed was heavy, laden not only with pain, but with bitter regret. She saw the hurt and exhaustion in Pedro's eyes, and the realization of the destruction her words and fury had caused hit her hard, like a blow. The fury had completely dissipated, leaving behind only a cold void and the bitter certainty that she had lost control of herself, of her emotions. She was trapped between the desperate desire to apologize, to mend the wound she had inflicted, and the paralyzing shame of her own outburst. An agonizing internal confrontation between the primitive instinct that drove her and the reason that belatedly tried to reassert itself, attempting to regain lost control. The rooster's fury reminds us of the overwhelming and often uncontrollable force of instinct that resides within all of us.